All right, quick update review, some information that might be useful to folks before we take the Super Sport over to my buddy to have him do a ceramic coating on the paint. So I happen to have a one tooth smaller, a 15 tooth front sprocket, which I bought for the R1, put it on and realized just how stupid that is on a bike like that. All it did was just, I mean, you have a bike that's already, has trouble keeping the front end down. And then you add, you lower the gearing, and it was just idiotic. I mean, all I had was electronic intervention, or I could turn it off and just loop myself to the moon. So I took it off. It had like 10 miles on it. Well, it turns out it's the same part number for that. That comes with a 16 tooth front. I ran the calculations on the Gearing Commander website, and theoretically it lowers the top speed at 10,000 RPMs from 150 to 141. Okay, whatever. Only raises my RPMs about 325 RPMs at cruising. So 80 miles an hour, if I have the cruise set for 80 on the interstate, I'll be turning around 5,300 RPMs. So not a big deal instead of 5,000. Didn't really notice any loss in that area as far as, I'm running excessive revs. What I did notice was a lot more punch. Going down a tooth on the front is roughly the same as 2.5 to 3 teeth up in the back. And that does add some good acceleration. That little bit of shuddering you get that people complain about when starting from a stop is a little bit eased because you got a little more grunt. You don't have to slip the clutch as much or give it as much gas because you're already at a slightly higher RPM, so it has that little bit of extra grunt. Acceleration, first gear, now it's just wheelies all the time. Second gear, it's starting to power wheelie up. And it definitely added some acceleration, not excessively so. There's some bikes where like I geared down the Z900 and it really didn't work. So I kind of went back to stock on that. But on this one, it definitely woke it up. You might lose a little bit of fuel economy. You change the gearing by 6.9%. It's not that big of a deal. So rode around snappier. It felt snappier. When you're accelerating, remember I talked about how I want to get the ECU flashed when they crack this ECU, because you give it full throttle, but until you hit 6,000, it just slowly, and then you hit that number and burp, and then it just goes. Well, now you kind of get up to that point faster. So when you're in second gear and you give it gas, you're not waiting for that turbo lag as long. The motor's spinning up a little bit quicker because of the lower gearing, and you're running slightly higher RPMs. So it gets up into that power happy zone faster. But again, it's not excessive. It's not a massive difference. But if you rode it and then you got on afterwards, you go, wait a minute, I feel like I just picked up like 5 or 8 horsepower. And that's just because of the greater mechanical advantage of that gearing. Being that it's a new bike with speed sensor rings front and back on the wheels for ABS and traction control systems, doesn't throw off your speedometer like the old ones do. So didn't have to do any recalibration. Let's see, what else? Is there anything else? Oh yeah, one thing I want to talk about. I had redone this seat, and there's going to be a new video coming with a new mod. So if we take this seat off. All right, so the lock for this one, I was talking about shimming it. So I took out the shims here. I took out the shims underneath this block that post on the seat rides on, because remember we had that play which is allowing the seat would lock in, but it would let it come back up and it would let it flop around a little bit. It wasn't going anywhere, but when you're moving around on the bike, if you ride it like a sport bike where you're kind of shifting your weight and getting one butt cheek off and leaning off the bike, you feel the seat kind of rocking around underneath you. So what I did was, there's now a gap. So what you don't see underneath here is I took these two bolts off, and this drops down, and it's just a lock with that spring-loaded clip in there. And instead of putting washers on each to lower that down, because what I don't want to do is raise anything in the back. That was the whole purpose of putting those shims down under there to raise this mounting bracket, was to get the seat so you're not sitting on your balls all the time and raise the front up. But there was still play in the back, and my first attempt was shimming up the back. Well, you raise up the front, it's more level, and then I'm raising up the back, and now I'm back on my balls. So what I was doing here was take those 2 nuts off. Those are 10 millimeter, just pop them off, and that thing will just slide out. It's one piece, there's no cable or anything to dick around with. And I took that piece of, and you can take just a piece of sheet metal, whatever. You just have to be careful of the thickness because you want to at least get enough threads to hold it. And then I put some red Loctite in there as well. And so what I did was I took that off. I got a piece of plate from a shelving bracket from Home Depot that was about 1.5 millimeters, almost 2 millimeters thick, which is about as thick as you can go with those bolts, unless you want to drill those out and put new bolts in. These bolts, the head of them, they don't spin. They're actually pressed into the metal. So you can either hammer them out or drill them out and put longer bolts, and that would allow you to really fine tune this. I found that I got enough adjustment just this way. So what I did was I took that plate, which is about that long and about that wide, just a rectangle, and about that thick, and I drilled holes in it, and I put that spacer on the bolts on the bottom side of this, and then put it through. And so what that did was, because I don't want to raise the seat, I want to lower the lock. And if you look in there now, if you look in there, you will see, I wish I had a little pointer, but where my face, right there, you'll now see there's a gap between there and there. But because there's a metal plate going along there, that lock can't come up. Before, that lock would come all the way up until it hit this mount, which defeated the purpose of moving it down if it was just going to basically tilt and allow that seat to come back up. So by putting a straight piece of steel all the way across, that is now, there's no gap. It looks like there's a gap there because it's recessed about 1 millimeter, but there actually isn't. That thing really can't move more than that. And that steel plate runs like from this bolt, actually from about back here to about here. And it runs to about there, about 1 millimeter or 2 under there. So you put that plate on the lock and then put the lock up. And so what it does is create a space, and it moves that lock down. Put your nuts on and tighten them up with some red Loctite. Put the seat back in. And what you'll see now is everything lines up right. That goes into the hole, giggity, where it's supposed to. This lines up, but notice it doesn't just click. I have to actually push that in. Look how secure that is. I don't have that rocking. I don't have any spacers anywhere here, so it's no longer lifting the back up. The seat is now sitting flat. So that's one mod that we're doing here, and all it cost me was a hacksawing up and drilling out a $3 Home Depot shelving bracket to make that spacer. But you could do that with any piece of steel. Could be aluminum, could be plastic, frankly. So experiment. When you pull that off, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about and what it needs to do. But being that I've already tightened it and Loctited it and got it where I wanted, I didn't want to take it off. Another mod I'm doing is I just ordered a yoga mat, about 1/2 inch thick of closed cell foam. I am going to take this off, and I'm just going to repad the seat a little bit. So I'm going to pull out all these staples. I'll leave the front attached because that's the hardest one to get all lined back up. So we're going to take out all these staples, peel this off, turn it over, and then I'm going to put the mat on it, cut it out, shape it, conform it. Of course, I just swallowed wrong. Always something. I can't get through a video without kids yelling or dogs barking or my voice going out because I swallowed wrong. Anyway, and I'll pad that, put that back in, and then we're going to restaple it. So I've got a heavy-duty pneumatic, plugs into big-ass air compressor. I've already tested it. It actually forces the staples in to the plastic, so I'll be able to put that on there, glue it in place, pull the cover back over, and just staple it right back up. There's plenty of slack in there in case it, it should stretch. And actually, when you look at this, if you see that, like there's an air gap in there. So I'm gonna be able to fill that in without really changing how this looks that much. And I'll slope it up here, pat it all the way to the front to cushion my boys, and then pat it up to about here. And then I'll scallop it so that it's not, I don't need it all the way up here. I need it really just in this area. So I'll lay it on, glue it on with some spray adhesive, and then slice it so there's not that, there won't be a 90-degree edge. I'll taper it and sculpt it into that and just add one layer and see how that feels. Already it feels better having this mounted properly with the shims and everything. So I'll do a video of that and a review, and as I take it apart, I'll show you what I'm doing. That's gonna be my next project. I was gonna do that right now. Unfortunately, Amazon has not delivered yet, so that'll be a project for tomorrow when it's raining and I got nothing else to do. So anyway, the modification of the new Sprocket, excellent. Feels really good. I highly recommend that. Just go down one tooth. I talked to somebody on the forum who's like, yeah, on mine I went up 10 teeth in the back because I want it to be like my YZF 450R, dirt bike. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not doing that. One tooth down is all this thing needs. Great, now I got dog hair in it. Just to give it that little bit of extra pep and give you that little bit of extra grunt, a little bit of extra acceleration to get into your happy zone in the RPM range, but not so much that it hurts highway cruising. I was cruising along, set the cruise control at 75, 70, 80, and looked at my RPMs, and at 70 RPMs, or 70 miles per hour, you're just under 5,000 RPMs. You go up to 80 miles per hour, you're at 5,300. You're just loping along, not a big deal. It's 300 RPMs, but you will notice the extra grunt and the extra acceleration coming off the turns, less waiting for it to get up into that happy zone. It's definitely a worthwhile mod. And then if you have that wiggle with the seat, do what I did. Whether you do the shim kit or not, get your seat where you want it, and if you've got that wiggle, sucker don't move now. It's perfect. That's the way it should have come from the damn factory. I'll need to send this video to Yamaha and say, here's how you fix that. Build in a spacer into your lock system and send me a check for a consulting fee for fixing your problem for you. Anyway, you got questions, you know what to do.